today's presentation. Today's presentation, I'm going to do it on a medieval shipwreck. Oh, what's going on here? Okay, that was just my laptop. Be looking at a medieval shipwreck, which I've been looking at the past couple of days in terms of my research, and it's something that I didn't really know about. So I thought I may as well do a presentation on it and talk about it, because what I've found, even the information online about it is very limited, which is quite infuriating. But I managed to find it through going to Cardiff Central Library, having a little look around the books. Got quite a few books actually, which is one of these ones I'm reading at the moment is South Wales and the March from 1284 to 1415 by William Rees. Which has been quite a good read so far, and just to see how Wales organised itself in a way that could have really strong trade through many things. It has been quite interesting to read. I've also come across quite a few things that seem to be a little bit unusual from my findings as well, and something that hopefully we can talk about in the future. So today will be one of those weird little findings that I found throughout my research, and it's just been really interesting. But the only way that I could get access to it, and they're in a lot of libraries, you can even buy it in Waterstones, but it's through this book here. It's by Nigel Nayland. It's called the Magor Pill Medieval Wreck, and it's literally a very detailed report that you can read on this shipwreck, and it's been really enjoyable to read, just looking at not just the ship itself but the history behind it, and I've been able to bring in what I know from certain historical sources to talk about it. So hopefully that'll be something that's really interesting for today. Oh, my laptop's gone blank. Oh, there you are, you're back again. Press the button there as I lent my arms out. I think we're still waiting for Anne, so I'll give her another 2 minutes, and then we'll start. But has anyone been doing anything this week that's been lovely? I know the weather's starting to pick up a little bit where I am, but I've just been sat in the garden looking at the flowers, and then obviously I saw Richard and Carl the other day, and managed to get quite a bit of research into my work as well.
Mm-hmm, good.
But anyone had anything interesting this week happen to themselves?
No. No, not really.
Oh, Richard, you were doing well with that skull, so
yeah.
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 I'll be back now. Okay, I'm going to start anyway now, and we'll have a look at this shipwreck, which it's been a delight to learn about, really. Okay. Seems a bit quiet without Anne, I think. So like I said, we're looking at this shipwreck. Hang on, if I just quickly get my notes up. And like I've given you an explanation as why I wanted to pick this for today's lesson. I'll give a quick introduction just to sum up what I'll be talking about, maybe what I'll be looking for as well. But one of my focuses of this research is looking at the significance of South Wales and trade, and even looking at trade routes from islands, and possibly Bristol's one of the places that I'm focusing on. And I think this shipwreck is seen a lot of attention from scholars. The only issue that I have is that we have so much information about this shipwreck. However, we don't know the nitty-gritty details that I'd like to know about things, such as who owned the ship, or how they lived, or even how the ship looked like. We're only using our imagination based on historical sources for this. And so we'll be thinking quite a lot really of what ships would have looked like back then, and how we can fit this ship in, and what's the similarities and the differences. But I think they're important shipwrecks in a whole, because I'll be looking at Newport's ship as well. But they're important, I think, because they also show the navigation between countries. But it can also tell us further what was being traded, who was it being traded by, what were their ships like, and hopefully we can possibly try and know as much as we can from the ship as things go on. Because, like I said, this book is it's quite detailed. It goes up to 160 pages. And there's lots of discussions from Mark Redknapp and other archaeologists. However, it seems like the identity of the ship, the spirit of the ship, is kind of lost when it sunk, and hopefully we'll get to know that more. But that was just on a side note. What I'm focusing on is trade, and so I'm just looking at this as a source that we can use to see how Wales was used for trade and how they were able to interact with places, and maybe sort of tell us more about what type of trade is coming in and out of Wales. It did lead me to something that I thought was quite strange. A lot of historiography that I've read have basically said Wales have never had kilns for pottery because there was no need to. They were relying from England. And it just doesn't sit right with me, because I know at least one kiln before all of this in Newport, up in not Newport, near where we are, the other Newport, in Pembroke, I think. And they have a kiln there that you can see. And I was just thinking, it just doesn't make sense. I think we need to know more about all this in terms of trade. It just didn't seem like it made sense with me that even in the earlier medieval period that we were having places from outside of Britain coming to trade with us, if we were only trading food stuff, necessities, because they can spoil quite easily. So that was something that I saw was quite strange about my research. But then I come across an excavation that you can see in Archaeologia Cambrensis near Caerleon. There was a kiln, and I initially thought that it was a Roman kiln and kind of brushed it off, but I had a look anyway. And it turned out to be a medieval kiln, and this is what I want to further look into maybe in the future, is to look at maybe the pottery waste that's there and the characteristics, and maybe compare it with possibly veilware or even anything else nearby, and see if there's any similarities, because it doesn't seem to be something that is well known and something that we haven't really incorporated in with trade. And I think this could be really revolutionary for what we know about the history of Wales and the archaeology. It's not just about cattle and agriculture and wool. I think that there is pottery coming from Wales. Is it like the whole thing, like when I was talking to Carl about it, it's like that whole thing with coins, saying that Wales never had coins because we can never find any of them. But there is small examples that we can give that show that there have been coins of Wales, and they were melted down. So I think looking at it like that, you can really sort of shoot yourself in your own foot, and it's just trying to Anne's here, and trying to prove it. So that's the important thing. Hi Anne, hope you're okay. We're doing the Magor Pill medieval wreck today, so that's where we are. We've only just done the introduction. So I'll be. We've only just done the introduction. So I'll be. And you're echoing. I'll see if I can mute you. And you're echoing. I'll see if I can mute you. Oh, there's two Anns, I think. I'll just mute both of them, and so that way I'm not kicking any one of those Anns out. So we'll be looking at the. You can see the basics of this excavation online, and it's quite infuriating when you find something that really, when you're researching online and you see something, you think, oh, that's a great link, this is going to give me all the information I know, and you click on it and is basically giving you just the way you would write it in a bibliography, saying that you'd have to access this through another way. So that was really infuriating. But to find this in the library the other day, it was like gold. And I was panicking because I didn't have my library card. But thank you to Cardiff Central Library for just giving me a new card. Because I wouldn't have been able to get this report. It is something that I have been sort of geeking out over maybe for a little bit. Maybe it's just probably because it's something that I'm interested in, but I think I know about Newport ship and I've known about other little ships, but I never really knew about this one. And to me, it just seemed like it was important. And this is literally opposite Bristol and the River Avon that they had found this, and is just east from Newport. So to me, maybe this was because what you see with ships at this time, they're coastal huggers, and you'll see that from the way this ship has been built. So to me, it looked like it was coming from Newport and going to Bristol, or vice versa. But we'll get into the discussion of that and just go down the rabbit holes with me with it as well. But it was in 1994 that a local archaeologist, Derek Upton, had made this discovery. He was visiting the area with a team of archaeologists that had come from Germany, and they were just having a look at the landscape. And buried in the mud was a ship, but it was sticking out almost. And so this really took the interest of them. Gosh, I'll have to mute Anne again. I think, there's like 3 Anns now into all of this. So I'll just carry on. Where are we? So this, to me, it just further this ship already from seeing where it is. We're looking at how the Severn Estuary is important for trade and navigation. And I've heard quite a few sources in terms of talking about the way ships go here and there. There's one called Frederick James Edwards, who really goes into the nitty-gritty parts of navigation and how that connected with England and how that connected with Ireland, and just how this allowed them to benefit from trade everywhere, not just Wales and England. So I think here is just that it's almost like it's a diverse way of trading, and it's just in their area. But to me, it doesn't really answer some of the questions we have in terms of Mediterranean pottery and even French pottery, which that's something that I will talk about further in the future, or even mention as passing by, because I don't know whether I have enough on that for a full lecture. But that's been driving me up the wall, because it just, some people say that we're trading directly with Bristol to get all of these I'd say exotic. For the time, it probably would have been exotic to be away from Britain, all that type of glassware and pottery. But to me, something's just telling me that why wouldn't other areas trade with Wales, especially because people will probably see how well he was trading with Ireland and Bristol. But we'll be talking about quickly the location as well after all of this. But it was in 1995 they decided to do a full excavation. They did do a few test pits beforehand. That's just because they wanted to ensure that this was going to be significant to them in any sort of way. And they did manage to find quite a few things. They managed to find 2 fish traps here from the 1100s. And a 13th century boat, which they noticed that was sticking out. And so this further led to them, to me, this further led me to connect that this area maybe was just a fishing community. And you read books like one from William Rees, and you realise that these fishing communities brought a lot of wealth to the area and was really beneficial. And you even see this in terms of Tenby being talked about, and even down by on the River Esk, etc., even going all the way across to Bristol. So to me, it just showed that there is some evidence here that this would have been a trading area, and on the way of it. But no one has seemed to, even though connections have been made in terms of that, nothing seems to be that complete and concrete. And I think it's quite frustrating sometimes when you look at historians that talk about just the documentary sources in terms of this, because they're not giving out the little nitty gritty bits. To me, they're just looking at documentary sources which tell us very limited things about Wales at the time. And what I have found is that documentary sources, you can't rely on them because they might miss things out, it might be biased, and I think that's what they're looking at, and they're making it something that's a concrete image of what we see in this time period. But I disagree. I think this was an area that had a strong sense of trade. But as we move on, we'll start to see that there was part of this ship that was able to give us more evidence of very luxurious trade. And what I mean by that is at the time it was pottery that had a lot of patterns on it and unusual shapes. Some of the pottery has not been identified yet, and so that'd be quite interesting to see if I can make any connections myself. But at the moment, I'm getting a sense of veil fabric wear as well coming from this ship. But this ship was a big job to deal with, because they couldn't just get it out of the mud and just move it. They had to ensure that it wasn't going to be damaged. This wasn't that well preserved when they had found it. So what was of interest to them was to literally lift it up with a crane and move it somewhere safer so they can start preserving it. And a sample of the timber was analysed, and it showed that the ship had been constructed around about the 13th century. So this provided some evidence of the time period and maybe give them a direction to go in terms of documentary evidence. However, we'll get into it a little bit further, that there was a little bit of a struggle in terms of trying to date the timber, because some of the timber that was being used had been basically, it wasn't from the original ship. They were maintaining things as they went along, so they were having some pieces of evidence of this being much later. But when they looked further, they realised that the earliest date that they could get was the 13th century. So that's where they went from, because the majority of it was 13th century. But boat finds from this period are very rare in this area, and the decision was to try and recover and conserve the remains, because this was something of gold dust for archaeologists, and something they wanted to make sure that they could keep this in a good condition to tell more people about it in the future. And this was a very difficult task because it was only exposed for a minimum of 2 hours each side of low tide. So this was making this even more difficult to work with, I think. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of this as well, if you do want to read more about it online, the best website that I could find of it was literally the Magor pill boat. That's the title of it, and it's in a website link called Living Levels. It'll be the first thing that comes up. But like I said, nothing else has really been written about it unless you buy this book. But the wreck was excavated and recovered by Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust, and it had help from many other other people who could help lift up the mud from this area, ensure that it was all safe. And the timbers were well preserved in the estuary mud, and it was sent to the National Museum of Wales for conservation and analysis as well. If my laptop wants to move. So we'll quickly talk about the finds as well. The finds of this has been quite interesting. I've applied information here of what it would have looked like, some of the finds, and this was only part of the finds that you could read in the book, but it gives you a good sense of the variety and the different style of each one of these finds here. And again, I love a bit of pottery. I think I get a little bit too excited over pottery sometimes. And so I spent ages looking at this. And they did find Roman pottery here. This was something that they managed to bring an expert in this in, Peter Webster. You find in this book, which is, I think this is what makes me smile about it, even though it was mostly written by Nigel himself, he brought in loads of people such as Mark Redknapp, like I said, Peter Webster. We're reading about other archaeologists in this as well who are able to give their expertise and input, and it's definitely a book that's worth getting. I'm trying to see if I can find the price on there, because like I said, it was something that I just bought from the thing. They do have it in Waterstones. I know they have it in Waterstones. I can't imagine it being a very expensive book because it's not that type, but if you like reading about things like this, Odyssey is worth a go, because I'm thinking of buying it myself. But anyway, Peter Webster was the expert that was able to be brought in to talk about the Roman pottery that they found. It was unconnected to the boat, but to me, it further shows how the medieval period stayed with Roman areas of trade, and so that was, to me, that just adds further with the early medieval period. This is something, a legacy the Romans have given in terms of trade that hasn't left Britain, and I don't think it will, but in terms of looking at this period as well. But they just found 3 sherds of South Wales greyware as well, from all from jars. And I know that they've talked about this in terms of near where I live as well, this type of greyware. And this is thought to be of 3rd century. It had horizontal lines that look like a zigzag as well along the side. And it had a mid-grey to a light grey exterior surface, and it did look really nice. It was kind of it goes out like that at the top, and then it goes like quite round, so like that, and then quite round, and it had the decoration around the neck. And then they even found there's a lot of South Wales greyware from just this period, from the 3rd century period that they had found. But to me, that just shows that there was trade going on here. There is some significance and a reason why I think trade would have carried on from the Roman period and have a significance. But it was when we got to the pottery from the medieval period by Mark Redknapp that things really started going up a notch, because this was recovered from the wreck during the excavation, and it's been able to tell them a lot of things. You can see a lot of this in terms of the national museums and galleries of Wales as well. But there was a handmade blade trimmed cooking pot with a plain rim that had been found, which is the first image that we're seeing here on the screen. So if I get my pen out, it's this one here. That one there. So this is the first one. They're thinking that there is a minty type fabric, and it had this almost like a thin splashed olive green glaze on it, and the rim top was uneven as well. It was a little bit uneven, and they even had a diagonal coming through it as well. And this was thought to be almost like a brownie colour, this type of carving. But this would have been this would have had a lot of limestone inclusions in it, and it was probably made in the Minty area between the late 12th to the 13th century. This is another thing that we can use to date the ship as well. And this is looking at cooking pots produced at these kilns from Minty, is identical to the pottery found in Magor Pill wreck. And Redknapp talks about this. He said that there's a lot of similar cooking pots at the time that have a lot of this design that is from the same area as well. And I just realised there's 3 people on the YouTube as well. So hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying. But they also found something else that was quite interesting. They even had found next to this type of pottery, they had found a silver penny near this pottery in the vessel. So I didn't know why I wrote near the vessel, but I also see that I have a typo. So it was found next to this piece of pottery, near the pottery in the vessel, and it was from Henry III. So it gives us the date of 1248 to 1250, which we'll get in further with that. But again, this just further these three things: the timber, the pottery, the silver penny. This is allowing us to have just dating, and I think each one complements the other, so it gives us a very solid date of what we're looking for. And I think it provides us a place to go in terms of looking at the history as well, and the documentary evidence. And one thing I wanted to note is when we get to the historiography, we'll talk about fisheries, but William Rees really touches on that, and I think it gives us a significance of why this area was bringing in so much luxurious goods. But we'll get to the second piece of pottery now, which isn't shown on the screen here. This is just something, it was very small. It was a wall sherd from a cooking pot from the same type of fabric as number one. And then we get to number 3, which is on here, which is this one here. So they've only got this type here, this part of it, but they're able to place it into the rest of what they think the pottery would have looked like. And this was a wheel thrown jug wall sherd, and it had a yellowish red core and a reddish yellow interior surface. And it had patchy dark yellowish browns external glaze on it, and the fabric, this would have been really amazing and really detailed and showing off a little bit, but this fabric comprises of fine oxidized matrix containing occasional mica and fine black specks, sub-rounded and sub-angular inclusions, and even occasional white quartz put in there as well. So this is something that's really luxurious, really shown off really in terms of pottery. And this is what I'm trying to say. When you look at William Rees's book, South Wales in the March, from 1284 to 1450, he talks about fisheries and how they have provided the most wealth for South Wales. And to me, this would have made sense. If they're going over to South Wales and they were nearly getting to that point, and that's where they had sunk, they would have been providing South Wales, in exchange for their fish, which they would have put in 3 categories, which would have been basically very small and useless to a small kind of medium-sized one, which would have been okay. They would have not had much money from, and then a large fish, which they would have got a lot for. And I think these fishing communities, as noted in the March and by a lot of historians who talk about the March, you notice that fishing communities were very important and brought a lot of wealth to the area. So I think, to me, this made sense that they would be having this type of pottery go into that place as well. But it just makes it even more amazing to look at, and to even describe that piece of pottery just sounded magical to me, because there is so much going on. There's a lot of detail and craftsmanship going on here, which we know Wales here benefited from. And then we get to this part here, the number 4. So you can see that there's a lot of variety in terms of the pottery that's being found here, but you see a lower handle attachment from a wheel-thrown glazed jug, which had a reddish yellow external glaze on it, and even had almost like a olive external glaze, but it had darker olive patches on it as well. And it was oxidized fabric with moderate, well-sorted white quartz put into it. And it had these occasional sandy, rounded inclusions put into this as well. Something, again, having a lot of craftsmanship. It even sometimes had some fine black specks through it. But they believe that this possibly would have been evidence in terms of the hard orange fabric, that this would have been a Glamorgan glazed ware. And they've put here karl-james fabric, which then to me has been connected with that kiln that I was talking about near karl-james, and something that could have possibly shown that maybe they have had a connection with this area already, and maybe they were just going to move on to the next area, and something had happened to this ship. And we don't really know what's happened to this ship, but we can theorize. And then we get to number 5, which is again is this fantastic one here. Again, you can see how detailed it was and how they're trying to show us what it would have looked like. So this had a pinkish grey to a reddish yellow surface on here, with a light grey to a grey core. And it had the hard fabric had ill-sorted fine angular and subangular white and clear quartz put into this, which also had a lot of moderate to ill-sorted inclusions. And the rim form and the decoration resembles that of late 13th century wasters found at Penhow, and the sherd is identical from Penhow to the one that's found at the Magor Pill foreshore here in 1986 as well. So they're finding a lot of this pottery, not only on the wreck, but almost 10 years later, 10 years earlier, that they're finding this pottery being washed up. And so they managed to find in 1994 the missing piece to where all this pottery is coming from. And then they even found some more, which was it's almost like a thick wall sherd that had a large handmade storage jar. It was light grey fabric, had external trimming, but they're not sure of the source. Some of them even come up with maybe North Wiltshire, maybe sort of trade would have come down that way and going then through Bristol to South Wales, but something that they're discussing. And then we get to number 7, which is on here, the last one that we get to see on here. This was found literally near the wreck, so it wasn't inside the wreck like everything else, it was near the wreck, and because a lot of it would be moving, I think this further would have just been something that would have been thrown about. But this piece is significant because we're finding that this is from France, this piece of pottery. It's a very fine white fabric, had no glaze, from the 1300s. And we see a lot of this pottery in Cardiff, we see it in Tenby, we've seen it all across South Wales, and we see a lot of it in Ireland as well. So in my eyes, this is what's left me torn, because some people are saying that yes, we would have had trade with France. Yes, we would have had trade with Spain, because we have all this pottery from this area, can't you see? And in my eyes, I'm seeing evidence like this, which is suggesting that this pottery from France and Spain is coming from England. And so we're indirectly trading with Spain. It kind of leaves me on, this is one of those things I still need to find something that makes me feel comfortable with going with one side. Here we're seeing from Bristol area to South Wales is French pottery that is coming over. But I'm still trying to find if there's any pottery that we can talk about that has gone directly to Wales. So at the moment, this piece of evidence, if you're going to go off it, Wales is indirectly trading with France. And then just one thing that I wanted to talk about further as well, number 8 is a small wall sherd as well as a glazed jug. They haven't really identified that. They didn't even give much context of it either, so I don't think it was that much. But they have this water-worn jug, which was very strange to find. It was a light brown surfaces with a grey core, had no glaze, again, something that they're unsure of. And then they even had even brick tile and tile fabric as well. So again, no context to it, just that's what they have found. So you have been able to find that there's a lot of finds going on here, and managing to pull a lot from this site and try and understand as much as we can of the connections with Wales. But then we get to the boat itself, and This is an image that they have of the boat that I thought was quite significant to look at, because it just shows how it's mapped out very clearly. The book that you do, the book that I am reading from, it has so many different types of drawings that really look at all of this in detail. And I think we'd be there all day if we just talked about it at every page of it, because I have not seen something so detailed in my life. Well, I have, but in a long time, I haven't seen something so detailed, and I'm enjoying every single bit of it. So I'm glad that I'm finished with it now, but I'm quite sad at the same time, because it just seemed like every time I was reading about this book, I was just finding new things out about it. I was going down new rabbit holes, and I almost like to pretend that I'm a detective in all of this when I'm looking at this. But we'll look at the ship. But another thing quickly I forgot to mention in terms of the finds, I haven't mentioned here, but they found 10 bones that was near the boat. And they just found that it was a group of bird bones that maybe would have represented food waste. And because the reason that they got to that was that they found butchery marks on here, which is just showing that a lot of the part of the birds was being removed in the kitchen. And that's as far as they got in terms of that. That wasn't something that they were significant, but to me that could possibly show that that this is just the type of food that's going back and forth as well, and the type of trade. But this photo that we're looking at is just a photogrammetric survey of this boat. It's a plan, and there's a lot of detail in terms of this. You could, sorry, I realised I didn't move, but you can see a lot of detail in terms of this as well. This is what they had found, and this is just how they were able to map it out more easily so they could talk about it. But what they could find was that this ship was very active, and the reason why they found it to be very active is the fact that it had lots of repairs on it, loads of different types of repairs, and they said that this had made it very difficult to look at the ship, because they're seeing that there's different types of wood being used, and they had to ensure that they were finding the earliest type of wood to be used to look at it in terms of dendrochronology. But they were able to change quite a small bit of the keel. I know they even started to look further in terms of the way the boat was looking, and it wasn't well preserved. And I think this further showed them that they needed to conserve this, look at this. And so they have plans like this as well, in case the ship is no longer about, so people can look at the plans instead. And they really do help as well, because they even give you a size reference on the side. So I think they've done quite a good job recording all of this, ensuring that that all grounds are covered for the future. But they realised this boat, and they were looking at it, it was built in a North European style, so that was quite interesting. But they even found maintenance in terms of the floor timber as well, on the underside, to be changed a little bit, to have a lot of work done with it. You can see that a lot of nails have gone into this one spot, and so it was kind of eroding away, and it showed that they were constantly trying to fix this, but not very well. They're able to find that a lot of the side, the side here that we're looking at here, this part of the boat was refixed quite a lot as well, and in terms of this part of the boat, that was maintained a lot and changed. But it seemed that a lot of the boat, it was almost like it was mismatched. It was mostly this area here, and this area here that was providing evidence of the earlier ship, and this part here, earlier ship. But I think it can be a bit frustrating when you realise that lots of them are bringing up different dates, and so it brought the issue of the fact that a lot of the ship had oak from different areas as well. And They even have a split in 6 port strake that appeared holes in, basically from a repair. I don't know if you can see myself on the screen, but it's that there. They just found that there was holes in terms of looking at the repair of this ship on part of it, and how the holes on here just show the change because they're maintaining the ship. And I think it makes sense. You wouldn't make a new ship every time one went down. You'd work with what you got. And so that was what they were doing. This boat served them well, and so they wanted to keep repairing it and keep with them. But I think it just caused problematic when you're looking at the dating of it. But we'll look at the archaeological significance here. So a lot of them had talked about this ship and where it'd come from. So they looked at a lot of 13th century town seals that were depicting ships. So they had one from Bristol, which was showing a single mast, a rudder and a tiller on there, and it was almost like a little bit longboaty style. And they even talk about there's a lot of ships in terms of these seals that are showing that there was one, for example, from Dover. And this one from Dover, it looks a little bit like a longboat, but it's a little bit more chunkier and deeper in terms of that. And they even found one in terms of Dunwich as well, which is just showing ends of 4 cross beams, more looking like a longboat here. And I'll show that as we finish the end of this. I'll put it to the camera as well, all the different seals that they were able to draw upon. And then it was mostly the 13th century that they were looking at, and these town seals were very important to finding out how they were able to get more evidence of this. And when they looked at all of this, they realised that this boat had a tradition where it was a keel tradition, and very few are found in England, but the one that they could think of the most was this 7th century ship that we know from Sutton Hoo, this burial that had a similar type of tradition in terms of making the ship. And this is thought to have connections with Ireland in the earlier medieval period, as they were introduced to Norse influence, and this influenced them in terms of their ship making, and this was then brought over to England, and possibly something that would have been seen in South Wales as well. These ships are important because it allows them to navigate up rivers. And from what I've read in terms of the Gerald of Wales, in terms of even just historians, it seems that the River Usk, for example, the River Taff, they're important to get up to actually trade, especially Cardiff being somewhere that would have been almost like a capital at the time as well. So a lot of significance in terms of that as well. And I think it does make sense that this ship would have had some French pottery on here, because we see a lot of that in terms of Cardiff, the fact that the Cardiff had French pottery there, so maybe it would have been something that would have come from a ship like this. But the only type of Welsh sort of pottery that we found is that it's almost like a Glamorgan sort of the Glamorgan Vale sort of fabric, which they haven't seen around. And to me, that would seem that it came from maybe that kiln that I was talking about near Carleon, and it was just making his way down. But again, I'm making connections as we go, and that's what my brain's been like throughout all of it. I think at one point I always put big A3 pieces of paper up on my wall, and I write on it, and I do look like maybe a crazy conspiracy theorist when I do it, because I'm writing all these spider diagrams pointing to all these things, and you see all the rabbit holes that have gone off in my head. And this is what I've been like the past week or a week and a half, really. But they were able to look at other places as well, in terms of carvings. A boat that's been portrayed from the late 13th to the 14th century. It's in a parish of the Church of St Baglan as well, in Carnarvonshire. And this inscription here is this type of boat that we see with these seals. It's similar, so it shows that they would have had a connection with a boat that looked like this, and the boat that we found is evidence of that. And you see a lot of iconography that show us what ships would have looked like at the time. So they're really pulling on lots of things here to try and get a sense of what's going on. But this silver penny, now this isn't the silver penny that you find from the excavation. That was something that I could not find, but I know it was there. So I just found an image, and this is what it would have looked like. Don't know whether it was in that good of a condition. I've seen quite a few of them being sold on a lot of sort of historian websites that you can buy, and they're going for quite a bit as well. So definitely, if you've got a spare thousand in your a couple of thousands in your pocket, if you want to get that, like, you can. Obviously I couldn't, because that's just crazy, I think, to me. Maybe in the future. But this ship was found near medieval fish traps, and the archaeological evidence to me, it was going to an area, a fishing community that was benefiting from wealthy trade with this area, in terms of looking at the pottery. And this pottery is really luxurious, and so these fish towns, just like is mentioned by William Rees, would have yielded a lot of luxurious goods and have brought a lot of wealth. So that would make sense to me why we saw the pottery that we did. But this penny, I think, is interesting because it's thought to give the origin of the ship of England, but it seems that maybe some of the imports are from Welsh pottery. So some people have argued that maybe is this a ship that came from Wales, really, and was just slowly going back home, because the majority of the stuff there was from England. So maybe that's something that they managed to gather from England while trading what they needed to trade, and they were just taking it back home. Just because they have things from England there doesn't mean that it's from England. It could have been something that they obtained from England, and they just kept the change, maybe because it would have possibly been useful if they wanted to trade for anything they might not have had enough items for in the future. But that's what someone's argued. But we get to the historiography here. William Rees, in his book, very bland looking book from the front, but very good in terms of looking at the historiography of the marches and how this fits in with the fact that this was a time that trade was booming, because Wales was having a lot of organisation and political stability going on here. A lot of administrations going on, local and central. They managed to keep things in rein, but people were still able, in some sort of way, to be free. And this allowed Wales to benefit from a wide range of trade from Ireland and Bristol. And this was really rich. But when we look at fisheries, they're important as well as farming as well, because this shows the livelihood of coastal towns. This shows where the wealth... Hang on a minute. Oh, hang on, just working now. Sorry, my thing went all funny. Hang on a minute, I'll be back now.
What happened?
Sorry, I was just telling everyone to be a bit quiet, so you can hear my lovely voice. Anyway, we'll get into it. So the historiography of Wales it's been really interesting. This book I've really honed in on. I've even looked at a lot of historians such as E.A. Lewis as well, who talk about the development of the industry of Wales, and showed further, complementing William Rees in a more contemporary time, that this was a period that fisheries were important to Wales. And he even talks about, along with William Rees, along with Gwynfor Evans, these are historians that have talked about this, and a historian as well that has given me a lot of evidence in terms of the economy is Matthew Stevens. He's in Swansea University. He's written a great book called The Economy of Medieval Wales, and he really put together things quite nicely, especially with all these scholars. I read them all. I couldn't get hold of his book until quite later, but I was reading it and I smiled to myself because he was referencing the things that I've read. So it's almost like I got a little bit of relief at the fact that I wasn't going off on a tangent and I was actually keeping it close. But he even spoke himself about how wool, in terms of agriculture, in terms of livestock, in terms of fisheries, were important for Wales at the time to bring this rich trade. But the woods of Wales is what's mentioned by William Rees to be significant, because there was a lot of wood being used in Wales. There was even traded in terms with the March period, showed that it was close with Bristol, and this is what Bristol was benefiting from us, was our oak, our timber, in terms of all our wood here, because we had so many woods here. So it gives us further. Wales has got a lot going on here. I think that has brought a lot of interest to people for the archaeology, of looking at the archaeology of trade, because there's a lot of going on here. And when you look at the historiography puts this as a country that's quite plentiful, with great pastures and lots of fish, and really sophisticated in terms of that trade. It was necessities that people lived off, and I think that's why they were able to pick themselves up, because towns are growing, populations are growing, people are more connected with each other, more people are interacting, and they have the things, the luxurious foodstuffs, the luxurious cloth, and even from some of the archaeological evidence, we're seeing kilns being found. So maybe Wales is more rich than what we give it credit for. But looking at Gerald of Wales, even though he's from the medieval period, he's able to talk about his recordings of the area, and you can see him as a historian, because he's noting down events and the landscape as he sees it at the time that we can use. And he does describe this as being a place that would have he doesn't say it directly, but a place that would have had a rich variety of trades. He notes the fisher communities. He notes how good navigation is in terms of rivers. He notes of how he allowed communities to benefit from so many things that are around them on their landscape, that allowed people to be interested in Wales. And I think that's why Wales had always been seen as a powerful one. Because I read in terms of another scholar, is that the Normans were interested in Wales for political stability. They were the key to Britain. And what I mean by that is that they saw that Britain had a lot of sophisticated trades going on in the early medieval period. It might not be as big as the later medieval period, but I think the reason why Wales was almost happy to let their guard down, maybe a little bit with the Normans as well, is the fact that maybe they saw that they could get things out of the Normans, and the Normans saw that they could get things out of them. So it was almost like a win-win sort of situation. But the Normans were very calculated, and they ended up taking over a large part of South Wales, and possibly what Wales was hoping to benefit from, it wasn't what they were thinking. But this was because they're powerful. And so the historiography is telling me that South Wales is important in terms of Britain, because this is where people's trade is coming from. It's quite significant. Even what we've seen with Carl in terms of Landoc, in terms of Dinas Powys, in terms of Llanfair Major as well, you realise that there is some strong evidence to suggest that even in the early medieval period, before the Normans, this was a thriving area for trade, and something people definitely benefited from. But I think there's a lot of going on here. There was no compasses in the 13th century, so I think observation was made of landmarks, and this made them a coastal hugger in terms of ships. So the historiography of that fits into what we can see of the boats left over, because this would have been something as a coastal hugger, so it would have been like the Viking Norse ships, to allow them to be close to the coast and to allow them to go up rivers. And you even see that in terms of sources that we can see in the Archaeologia Cambrensis, which has been quite interesting as well, because if I can find the name of the individual before I even start saying things about knowing it. Oh, I can't find it now. See, I've got too much paper going on. Oh, there it is. I found it. I've got too many notes. See, I've got to a point where I think I might need to start filing them instead of just leaving them in a pile in my room. But this is from W.A.R. Richardson. It's in Archaeologia Cambrensis. It is something that you can look at. Is online on the National Library of Wales as well. Quite a lot of the editions. The early editions in the 1800s, the 1900s, and the 1900s to now as well. That is a lot of variety of sources that you can find, and really get you exploring the area. But his article just looked at cartography and how names of places can be messed up because they might not understand the accent. Maybe if it was someone from Spain, for example, and France, they saw that the cartography of Spain and France, the names of Wales, it's almost like the way that you hear them rather than the way that they are spelt. And it just shows that you've got to really put yourself in the minds of other people that are not from Wales. But you notice that in terms of Spain and France, they have a connection with quite a few places, notably Newport, Cardigan, and even Dinas Powys. But it showed that it was only the later medieval period, I think, where things like cartography really started to set off, because at the time people were just happy to be coastal huggers, which fits in with this ship. And then we get to the reconstruction. Apologies for this awful photo. When I took this photo, it was quite light, and I looked through on my phone and it looked fine. And then when I put it on here, I realised it looks quite blue, so I apologise for that, but enjoy a blue boat. But this is, like I said, they use a lot of these seals to reconstruct this ship. And so this has allowed them to have an image of what the ship would have looked like, very long. This is the reconstruction that they had done so they can understand the way it was built and how it was built. But it was these seals that were depicted in these medieval ships, I think, would have given them a better sense of what it would look like, and even showed them, like I said, to be North European in style. And some scholars have argued that the wood has been used from Bristol, and that's the way that the archaeologists went in terms of discussing this. However, I think a lot of historians note that Wales had great pastures and woods full of trees, so maybe this is something wood that maybe Bristol would have got obtained earlier on and used for this ship. But again, you see them using a lot of different types of wood samples from different types of trees from different areas to try and understand this. And they were able to come across with a lot of evidence, but it's suggesting to them that they've got the right time period, and they were able to reconstruct this. I think is just amazing how they were able to reconstruct all of this and really show it off. I really would love to see it shown off more. In a summary, so I'll turn the screen off in a bit so I can show you the seals as well, because they look absolutely amazing, and you can understand them further how this influenced everything. But the pottery on board, I think it just showed these luxurious items because they're beautifully painted. They got these glazed pottery with a lot of inclusions into it, and this would have shown that they were having very valuable trades in Wales to obtain this type of pottery. But the reconstruction, I think, is important because it drew on many sources as well. Like I said, the seals, they looked at documentary evidence, they looked at other archaeological evidence of what the other ships that look similar. And I think this ship is just important because we're not getting the trade coming out of it. We're not just getting the reconstruction, but we're even getting a sense of how this ship was benefiting from the connection between South Wales and West England through the Severn Estuary. And I think a lot has been brought out from the ship. Like I said, the nitty gritty things about the ship's identity, its owners, its story, the story of the owners. We will never know, and so that's something that's quite frustrating. Unless we find something that's really revolutionary, I think it's something that we'll never know, and so he's been given that name for the area that it's come from. But I think it's fantastic piece of evidence because it's showing this navigation that would have been a coastal hugger along South Wales from England all the way to Ireland possibly, or even just down to West Wales really. But I think it's an absolute great find. So if I escape out of this and then I stop share so I can show you. Oh, okay, I stopped shared. I didn't even click that, but we'll roll with it anyway because that's what I wanted to do. But you can see that these seals here are the types of seals that they're drawing the evidence from. If you can see here as well, so this helped them with the reconstruction of the ship, which I think is absolutely amazing just to draw upon things like that. But even down to looking at carvings, just seeing how they would have connected with places that would have seen these types of ships. So I think they're absolutely fantastic that they're able to pull in iconography now from churches, look at seals. I think that it was just a very nice, meaty discussion to get into, and something that I absolutely loved. So I'll ask questions. So Pat, anything that you'd like to ask or add, or anything that has interested you?
Yeah, well, the mention of fisheries. I wondered what a fishery was, you know.
Yeah, so this would have been areas that would have benefited from, hang on, let me just see if I can get my notes up on this. I know which areas that would have had a lot of fishing going on here, and the fish traps of the area, I think, is evidence that it was going to,
which makes it a fishery, huh? It's a sort of trap they use.
Yeah.
I see.
And so this is a community that would have, you see Tenby's a most notable fishery along South Wales. There's lots of traps going on here in terms of salmon traps as well. And you do see them up in St Ishmael's in Pembrokeshire as well, which is absolutely amazing. When you look at them online, or even just look at them in reading, you see how fish was an important thing. And we know herring and salmon, which were the most important things that Wales had fished, were the things that were sought after because they were seen as luxurious. I think it was like almost like the caviar of his day. So I like a bit of salmon, so I don't blame him on that. It's a nice bit of fish. But the book that I've been reading that you can get from most libraries, from William Rees, he has a page on fisheries, and he talks about the rights of fishing with the march as well, and the lordship, and how certain laws had required their citizens to have a license to fish in these areas. And so it brought more of an economy to not just the individuals and the communities, but to the lords as well. And I think that allowed Wales to grow in strength. So thank you, Pat. Yeah. Peter, anything that you'd like to ask or add?
Yeah, he's muted.
Oh, hang on.
Can't hear you. You're muted.
Oh,
Come on.
There you are.
There you go.
We know that Wales was rich in minerals, and we were a major exporter of lime. You mentioned lime kilns, and we were a major exporter of lime across to the rest of it. And England, remember, is only just a few miles up the river. It's not far away. You talk about England as though it was it was hundreds of miles away. It was only a couple of miles up the river.
Yeah.
Or across the other side, and that's all England. So it's not that far away. But the fact that we were rich, you know, with the trade, because obviously all the materials that they had in Wales, that they needed in the rest of the UK and other countries, and so they were quite happy to trade with Wales. Yeah,
definitely, and even in terms of salt,
was carried on in the Severn Estuary from ad infinitum. I mean, we know that boating was going on in the 6th century when St Caddoc was travelling back and forth to Plato.
Yeah, exactly.
And travelling across the Bristol Channel. So we know there was a lot of boating going on then. So boating in the Bristol Channel is, you know.
I think it was very lively. I think it was a very lively coastline.
Well,
I love that area. You were talking about how people pronounce things, and I think there's like a debate on whether Magor, which our Newportonians say, is the right way, or Magor.
Yeah, Magor, which is
I suppose that's Welsh, isn't it? You know, you would say Magor for Welsh, you know. And there is a bit of debate going on about how it's pronounced, but we always said Magor.
Yeah, I've heard all different types of ones, and I think it's just the one that my brain goes to the most. But you can imagine how that would have been quite a confusion, I think, in terms of the writing, how you hear it, and you can see that from both ways. And that would have been a confusion to people that are not from Wales. And they say the first thing, and then they're like you, Anne, who say it a different way to me, and probably would have scratched their head thinking, "What are you on about? You're not on about the same place as me," but they actually are.
I mean, there's a lot of churches, in that area, and you've got Caldecott and Penhow, and you can see it was quite a wealthy area at one time. And before that, I mean, they say that Harold, was he a Viking, or was Harold a Viking? But he had a hunting lodge in Portskewett, which is just up the coast, So, I mean, that's early medieval, I think. Or it might be.
He had a Norse name.
King Harold.
Yes, second Harold. He had a Norse name.
So he is Viking.
Well, he possibly was a Viking.
Later.
Yes. His wife came and stayed on Flatholm. Sorry, his mother, Thorkild's daughter, who came to Flatholm and stayed on Flatholm after the Battle of Hastings.
Yeah, I think it is good that the Flatholm, the marshes, the marsh lands, or what's it called? What do they call it now? That where you said it was a society now that's joined together to look after all that area of the mud and the mud flats and all that. What's it called? You mentioned it.
Me?
Yeah, you mentioned whoever wrote the book belonged to.
What book are you on about now, Anne? Which one?
Oh, it's all right. This isn't.
No, go on. It's fine. Which one?
The book that belongs to the man who wrote it from the group who explore and look after the marshes. The
Nigel Nayland book. This one.
Yeah. It's
There's Mark Redknapp in here as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really important area. I'm really interested to see, them putting more life into it, because it's all like, lots of marshland. It's just everything's gone. But it's certainly a lot to investigate, especially these boats. There's bound to be more.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with that. And I think it's a very rich area from what we can tell. And even just on land, just on the coast, it's very rich as well. So I think it's a very significant area as well. And definitely something that would have allowed Wales to be wealthy.
Probably wasn't even wrecked. It was probably just left high and dry.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. There's been a lot of theories in terms of that, and that was one of the theories that they brought up. They're not sure what has happened with it, but they think it was just left there. But then at the same time, I think, why would it just be left there with the pottery on there? So it's quite an interesting one. I personally think that maybe something would have just happened, maybe with the fact that it's there's a lot of maintenance going on. Maybe something went wrong on his way of coastal hugging along South Wales. And
the tides are terrible there, aren't they?
And it was only when the tides were coming out was when they could excavate. It was only 2 hours a day. So you can imagine that being a nightmare. I think it was possibly a nightmare to get through, but an important area to get through as well.
Thanks. Thank you.
It's all right. Richard, is there anything you'd like to ask or add as well?
No, really interesting subject.
That's all right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for Peter as well, for his knowledge. I know Peter knows a lot of that area, and sometimes it's just nice to get your perspective. I'd like Anne for having a bit of discussion as well. But
Severn Estuary is very rich in fish.
Yeah, definitely.
The whole area is a fishery.
And this is what brought Wales's wealth. This was important to Wales. It was their livelihood.
Crayfish, is it, or lobsters they got up near?
The best salmon.
Yeah, salmon and herring.
The best salmon.
Best and I do like salmon.
Salmon goes up the Severn and the Wye.
Yeah,
you get the best salmon and the best trout and everything. Yep.
Yes, it was important. It's their livelihood. So I think that's, again, it further highlights why this area is important, not just for navigation, not just because there's a lot of towns nearby. I think what is bringing all this together, without fish, none of this I think would have been possible to this extent as
that
well.
water.
So, yeah, fish and water.
That water.
Now, they say there
No,
were
thanks,
oyster
Jeff.
beds
That was
off Barry.
interesting.
Well, what did you say, Richard? Thank you, Anne, though, for what did you say, Richard?
Oyster beds off Barry.
And you even just have, I know where in terms of seaweeds as well being important for some things in the medieval period, but not as used as much as all the other things that we talk about. So you are starting to see there's a lot of trade going on, and there's a large variety of trade in Wales, and a lot of variety of trade that Wales has benefited from as well. I think it's a very rich area and a very important area to look at as well. Sometimes I wish I could just drain all the water and see what I could find, and then put the water all back again.
For every shipload that goes out, some others come in.
Yeah.
Yes, they're still coming in.
Well, yeah.
Still, and they're still fishing and all that. But it's like these classes are like putting a magnifying glass on the coast, and like you say, you want to prove that it was a highly, a lot of trade going on. So in a long time ago, whereas our trade now, because we use such large ports, it's very specialised, what we bring in and take out. Not like it used to be. It was just very domestic, really.
Well, you think of Barry being the most tonnage of coal in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't suppose they used coal in those days.
Why not?
They probably used wood.
Why not?
I don't know. I just thought they might not have.
There's a lot of surface coal. They didn't have to mine for it.
Yeah. Oh, especially in Colford. Well,
I know Wales benefited from trade in salt as well, in terms of minerals as well. So even just the book from William Rees, he just talks about that as well, and how you're able to see that there's a lot of things going on in Wales in terms of trade. And I think it's surprising because it seems like that this type of discussion seems to be kept to niche books and not something that's advertised in the media or in popular culture. It seems that from what I can get a sense of was that Wales was quite isolated, but then when you dig deeper you start to realise that Wales isn't as isolated as what we think it is.
No.
And that's what I'm trying to prove. So
we all agree.
I don't think there's any need to prove it. I think it stands out itself.
Yeah, I think it stands out, but no one sat down and actually connected each one of them to actually find solid evidence really of a trade route. All the evidence in the excavations are there. People have found things, but it's just connecting those dots. Someone hasn't sat down and done that. But I just think from my perspective, it's just, I think I would have liked to see more things online, more things in books that are just advertised to everyone rather than having to jump through hoops to find all these academic books and excavations as well.
This is where you come in.
Research has been done.
This is where you come in now.
I know.
You've got to start something off. I'm sure there's loads of people, who are interested. And of course, when they find things out, it sparks that interest,
Yeah.
I mean, things that we've lived with all our lives sort of thing. But younger people, they come upon things and, want to make it more interesting to people, the next generation. So it's all important.
Yeah, no, thank you, Anne. And thank you, everyone.
Okay, well. Thank you, everybody.
It's all right. Have a lovely evening.
Bye.
You okay, Pete?
Yes.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you everyone for watching. Like and subscribe. Every little helps. And thank you.
And don't forget to thank Gandalf.
Ah, definitely, and Gandalf.
You had 4 people watching at one point, so you still got 1 person watching now. So I'm gonna we'll say goodbye to YouTube. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. YouTube, stop live streaming. Yeah, and that vital.